It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the Millennium Elder found himself staring at the swirling mist of time. To any ordinary person, the air around him might have seemed empty, but for him, it was as dense as the fog on a forgotten battlefield. He'd seen it all: the rise and fall of kings, the tragedies of empires, the quiet shift of civilizations. Yet now, he was alone with his thoughts, alone with the weight of 10 centuries. Time doesn't run backward, the Millennium Elder muttered to himself as he rubbed his ancient face, his fingers tracing the wrinkles of a life spent wandering from one age to the next. But I'd like to see it try. And then, as if the universe had decided to humor him, something curious happened. A figure appeared out of the swirling mist. He was dressed in a peculiar suit, shiny and smooth, reflecting the colors of the world around him, yet not belonging to any particular time. His presence was out of place, but not unwelcome. "You must be the Millennium Elder," said the newcomer, his voice a smooth hum, like a breeze whispering through the leaves of a long-forgotten forest. The elder blinked, studying the man who stood before him. "I suppose I am. I've heard the title before, though it's never really felt right. But that's beside the point. Who are you, and what do you want?" The man smiled, revealing perfect teeth. "I'm a time merchant," he said, his words striking like a jolt of electricity. "I deal in memories, in moments. And I've come to offer you something unique." The Millennium Elder chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "A time merchant? That's a new one. Let me guess, you've got some sort of magical trinket to sell me, some gadget that lets you play with time." "I'm not interested." "Oh, it's not a trinket, not a gadget," the time merchant said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "I offer you the opportunity to revisit the past, your past. To see the moments that have shaped you. But there's a catch, of course." The elder sighed deeply. "There's always a catch." The time merchant grinned. "Every time you visit one of those moments, you'll lose a piece of your memory. A small piece, but it will be gone forever. But in return, I'll preserve it. You won't have to forget. I'll keep it safe. And I'll take you to the most critical points of your long life, so that you can relive them. The choice is yours, Elder." The Millennium Elder looked at the time merchant, his old heart stirring with something between curiosity and reluctance. 1,000 years of life meant 1,000 years of memories. There were moments, good and bad, that had defined him, but was he ready to revisit them? "He wasn't sure what's in it for you," the elder asked. The time merchant's eyes flickered. "Nothing, really. I simply find it fascinating. To preserve the essence of a person, to help them hold on to what makes them who they are. Time is my business, and I think you've had enough time for one lifetime." The elder tilted his head, studying the stranger. "I've had more than one lifetime, but I've also forgotten much of it. What happens when I lose it all? What happens when I can't even remember who I am?" The time merchant's smile softened. "That's precisely what I'm trying to prevent." Without waiting for a response, the time merchant waved a hand, and the world around them shifted. The fog swirled, and the Millennium Elder felt the familiar sensation of traveling, though this time it was as if he were being pulled backward. He closed his eyes against the dizzying motion, but when they opened again, they were no longer in the fog. They were standing in a bustling city, a city that felt strangely familiar, yet distant. The city before them was alive with energy, a beautiful place with towering spires, cobbled streets, and bustling markets. But the Millennium Elder's attention wasn't drawn to the grandeur of the city. No, his eyes were locked on the woman standing by the fountain in the center of the square. Her silhouette was familiar, like a half-forgotten dream that lingered at the edges of his mind. She was young, her hair flowing in the wind, her eyes sparkling with an innocence he had long since lost. "Who is she?" the Millennium Elder asked, his voice thick with something that felt like yearning. "That's your first love," the time merchant said, his tone quiet. "You met her when you were just a young man. Her name was Elira." Elira. The name hit him like a bell ringing in his ears. Of course, he remembered her. How could he not? She was the one who had made him believe in love, in something beyond the battles and the wars that had defined his early years. The elder moved forward, drawn to her. But as he walked toward her, he realized something strange. Her face was starting to blur, the features melting together like watercolors in a storm. The closer he got, the harder it was to hold on to her image. "Wait," he said, stumbling. Something's wrong. I can't remember her face." The time merchant appeared beside him, watching with an unreadable expression. "That's the cost of traveling backward. With every visit, you lose a piece of yourself, a piece of what you were." Her face, her smile, everything that once felt so familiar, it's slipping away. The Millennium Elder reached out, his hands trembling as they tried to grasp the fading image of Elira. But she was gone. Her face was nothing more than a blur now, a fading echo in the mist of time. "What's happening to me?" the elder whispered, his voice full of desperation. "Don't worry," the time merchant said. "I'll keep the memory safe. It's just that you can't hold on to everything. You're reliving it, but you're also losing it." The elder staggered back, his heart pounding. He felt a deep ache, like a part of his soul had been torn away. It was more than the pain of losing a memory, it was the realization that the person he once was slipping away. Piece by piece they left the city with the lost memory of Elira hanging in the air, a painful reminder of what the elder had given up. But as they continued their journey through time, something strange began to happen. With every stop, every moment they revisited, he found that the pain of losing those memories became easier to bear. It was as if his mind, in its infinite capacity, was learning to adapt to the empty spaces that had once been filled with details. The more he lost, the less it seemed to matter. The next stop was a battlefield, a memory that held no joy, only the heavy weight of war. This time, the elder didn't feel the same anguish when he watched himself fall into the chaos, unable to remember the faces of the soldiers around him. Instead, he simply watched, detached, as if the memory no longer belonged to him. "This isn't right," he muttered to himself. "I shouldn't feel so indifferent." The time merchant, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "That's what happens when you revisit your past. The more you let go, the less connected you feel to it. But I'm saving it for you, so you don't lose who you really are." The elder looked at him, suspicion creeping into his heart. "But what happens if I lose too much? What happens if I forget everything? Who will I be then?" The time merchant's smile softened. "You'll be whoever you decide to be. But I'm here to make sure you don't forget the things that truly matter." The Millennium Elder couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Every time they visited a new moment from his past, it felt less like a return and more like a strange, distant observation. He wasn't the man he had been. His mind was disjointed, his sense of self beginning to feel like a threadbare tapestry, each experience, each memory, slowly unraveling. It was all fading, and the more time they spent in the past, the more distant he felt from the person he once was. "Is it supposed to be like this?" the elder asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "Shouldn't I feel more connected?" The time merchant glanced at him, his expression inscrutable. "You're feeling the cost, but that's the nature of the journey. You're losing parts of yourself with each stop, but I'm making sure you don't lose everything. I'm holding on to what matters." "Then why do I feel like I'm losing everything?" The elder's voice cracked, frustration and confusion mixing with the growing sense of disquiet in his heart. The time merchant didn't answer immediately. He just let the question hang in the air between them, a quiet weight that neither of them was willing to acknowledge outright. Instead, he gestured for the elder to follow him. "Come, let's take a deeper journey. You need to see the most important moment of your life." They stepped forward again, and the world around them blurred, shifting once more, as if reality itself was turning its pages backward. The ground beneath their feet became a soft, mossy floor, and the air smelled of damp earth and the richness of history. They were no longer in the bustle of a city or the chaos of a battlefield. This place felt older, quieter. The elder inhaled deeply and recognized it immediately, the ancient city where he had once been revered. It was a place of triumph for him, a time when he had thought himself invincible. He looked around. The city was perfect, a snapshot of his golden years, a time when he had ruled as both philosopher and king. Yet, as his eyes scanned the familiar sights, something gnawed at him. The people, once so full of life, were now silent. There was no sound, no laughter, no chatter. Only shadows moved in the streets. "This is where it all started, isn't it?" he said, his voice quiet, tinged with a heavy sense of nostalgia. "The city, the power, the respect. I thought I had everything I needed. But I was wrong." "Yes," the time merchant replied softly. "But do you remember why the city fell?" The elder's mind raced as fragments of old memories came flooding back. He had once believed himself a sage, a ruler who knew the way of the world. His city had flourished under his leadership, but there had been a cost. A decision, a single choice, had led to its downfall, and it had been his fault. He had been too proud, too consumed by his own sense of purpose to see the truth. He turned to the time merchant. I thought I was doing what was best. But I didn't listen. I didn't listen to the people who cared about the city. I thought I could do it alone." "And now?" the time merchant asked, his voice gentle but firm. The elder swallowed hard, feeling the weight of regret press down on him like a stone. He didn't want to relive this moment, didn't want to feel the shame that was now welling up inside him. It was a moment he had buried deep within his mind, a scar that he had kept hidden from the world. But here it was again, vivid and raw, the consequence of his own arrogance. I failed," the elder said, his voice small, almost a whisper. "I failed them all. And I failed myself." The city around them seemed to pulse with the energy of that failure. The grand buildings that had once been symbols of his success now seemed like hollow shells, empty and forgotten. The people who had admired him now lay in the dust of time, their faces turned away in silence. "What if I could have done things differently?" he murmured, almost to himself. "What if I hadn't been so sure, so certain of my own wisdom?" The time merchant placed a hand on his shoulder. "But you can't change it now. You can't go back and undo what's been done. What matters is what you take from this moment. What you remember." The elder looked up, a flicker of realization crossing his face. "You're right. I can't change it. But I can learn from it." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them a quiet agreement, until the elder turned and walked away from the ruins of his once great city. His mind was still heavy with the past, but it was lighter now, as if the weight of his memories had shifted just enough for him to breathe again. "I can't keep doing this," he said suddenly, his voice filled with a mixture of frustration and fear. "I can't keep losing myself. Every time I look back, I lose more of me. I don't even know who I am anymore." The time merchant said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before, almost sympathetic. "That's why I'm here. To make sure you don't lose everything. To protect the parts of you that matter." "Then tell me," the elder said, turning toward him, his eyes sharp with determination. "What happens if I lose it all? What happens when I forget everything, who I am, who I was?" The time merchant met his gaze with a seriousness that sent a chill down the elder's spine. "If you lose it all, you lose yourself. But you're not there yet. Not yet. We've only just begun." The elder could feel the weight of the words, and for a moment, he wondered if the time merchant was speaking the truth. Or was he simply trying to protect him from something far worse than he could understand? But before he could ask another question, the world around them shifted again. The landscape dissolved, leaving behind only the endless expanse of time. And then, the elder found himself standing in the middle of a quiet meadow, where the grass swayed gently in the breeze. The sky above was a deep, endless blue, and the air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers. "What is this place?" the elder asked, his voice uncertain. "This is your future," the time merchant replied, the Millennium Elder stared at the serene beauty around him. "My future," he echoed, trying to grasp the enormity of the words. "But what future? How can I have a future when I don't even remember my past?" "That's the question, isn't it?" the time merchant said, his voice carrying a note of quiet gravity. "You've been living in your past for so long that you've forgotten how to move forward. But that's what I'm offering you, the chance to let go of what you've lost, to build something new from what remains." The elder took a deep breath, the peaceful atmosphere of the meadow filling him with a strange sense of calm. He had spent so many years chasing after memories, after moments he could no longer hold on to, that he had forgotten how to look ahead. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe the key to living wasn't in clinging to the past but in embracing the future. "Is it really that simple?" the elder asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "Just let it go?" The time merchant smiled, his expression softening. "It's not easy. But it's the only way forward." For a long moment, the Millennium Elder stood there, gazing out at the endless horizon, his thoughts swirling like the wind in the meadow. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt a flicker of hope, an ember that had been smoldering deep within him, waiting to be rekindled. "I suppose I have no choice but to trust you," he said finally, his voice steady. "And to trust myself." The time merchant nodded, as if he had been waiting for the elder to come to this conclusion all along. "That's all any of us can do, elder." And so, for the first time in many lifetimes, the Millennium Elder took a step forward, away from the shadows of his past and toward the unknown future that awaited him. The road ahead was uncertain, but the burden of his memories felt lighter now, as if, just maybe, the journey itself was the answer. The time merchant smiled and followed, the two of them walking together into the endless expanse of time.